This is Cybersound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity, with your hosts, Jason Pufall and Stephen Maresca.
Welcome to Cybersound. I'm your host, Jason Pufall, joined as always by Steve Maresca, and a special guest today, Maurice Simpkins, who's the president of Simpkins and Associates. Welcome, Maurice.
Hi there.
Thank you for having me, Jason.
Yeah, I'm looking forward. So we had the opportunity to connect at the recent EDUCAUSE conference. It was sort of happenstance. I was just strolling around, and I'm not sure what it was. I think it was, honestly, I think it's just how well dressed you were. You caught my eye, and I said, I want to talk to this guy. And it turned out, boy, we had some real synergy, I think, in what we're doing in the security space and what you're doing in the sort of the higher ed application fraud and prevention space. So, if you could maybe open up with, what your company does, what the, sort of what that problem you identified and how you're trying to solve that.
Most definitely. Thank you. So I am the president currently at Simpkins and Associates, and we are a higher education focused firm based, out of the Atlanta, Georgia area. And our most recent product to market is called SAFE, and it is a platform. The Student Application Fraudulent Examination is what SAFE stands for. And the platform is built to be an additional or the line of protection for institutions, higher education institutions who are receiving student applications from any of their various systems. But it is that level of protection to provide them a multi-point risk assessment of each application coming through for the chance of being fraudulent or not. Higher education in recent times has become pretty much the number one target for fraud and for scamming activity. And so as we've seen this uptick in this major swing across the nation, not just in community colleges or in large institutions, you have Ivy League schools, you have some of the more prestigious schools that are still having these issues, rear its face. And so when we knew that it was an identifiable problem, ourselves and our team went to work, and the SAFE platform is what we brought to market, and we're having great success with it thus far.
So the numbers that you gave me when we spoke were pretty astronomical. So correct me if I'm wrong. I think the issue is probably biggest right now in the community college space, But you're seeing, in some cases, up to greater than 30% fraudulent applications. Are my numbers, are they right?
I mean, we've seen a lot of fraudulent applications work. We had a client that we were meeting with and talked to here recently, and over their Christmas break, they had the fraudsters went to work, and it got to the point of where, in some cases, 90% of some of the classes that were registered for during that period were fraudulent. 27 out of 30 were fraudulent, leaving 3 official records, students in those classes. And what had happened was, the institution, because when they came back from the break, they didn't really have time to assess all of the data and look through and see what was good and what was bad. They did what institutions do. They went out, made sure facilities was in place, made sure they had the adjuncts and the professors that were ready to go. And then a few weeks in, all of these people leave, and some of these professors are sitting here with 3 students in their class.
It's crazy.
And it's a major travesty there, because now it is affecting, IT is affecting operations, it's affecting capacity planning, it's affecting, financial aid, and you're talking potential chargebacks, you're talking potential fraudulent payments. It's a lot of involvement once this problem has kind of what I say is gotten its foothold inside of a higher education institution.
So what are the primary motives for a fraudulent application? Financial, reputational, what is the fraudulent entity getting out of it?
And I was asked that question at NerdConf this year, and it really made me rethink, because there's so many different ways, there's so many different reasons. Traditionally, or in the past, you would think students or these fraud actors were after the .edu emails, which are coveted. No phishing filter in the world is going to stop a .edu email. So you have the ability to have an open gate phishing if you want for that instance, or sell it for cheaper software, Microsoft, Adobe, all these different products, and even some systems you can get for cheaper if you have a .edu email. And so that was traditionally the aspect that we thought the scammers were after, but it's now, and it's really since the pandemic, where I think, the scammers see funds being, directed toward higher education, understanding higher education was late to the table with the digital transformation. A lot of colleges at the time of the pandemic were still receiving paper applications. And so having to make that jump quickly and efficiently, the one thing a lot of places tend to overlook in cases is how much security, how much detection of certain things are putting in place. And so now the fraudsters have gone so far as to registering for classes using fake credit cards and getting real refund money back either to them or to some fake person. They're using stolen identities. They're creating what we call synthetic identities, where they're grabbing data pieces from all over the internet, try to make us believe this person is real so they can get that check sent back to them for the refund. But we've most recently had an institution tell us about something that I thought was just mind-blowing. They were notified that some of the fraud actors and the scammers that were applying through their institution and getting as far as registering for classes and dropping for those classes were actually doing so to launder corporate funds or launder funds from a corporation. They had gotten access to a corporation's credit card account and was using that to register for classes at different institutions, and then would get a refund checks and cash them at the actual bank of that company to make it look like it was real. And so, you ask about why are they after it? It's so many different ways. I think that the underlying factor is they don't have a better way of trying to make money, and this is what they've chosen to be as their way of trying to make a living. For us, this is our way of living to shut them down, because no matter what they're after, our goal is to prevent them from getting to it.
One of the interesting things I think that you had mentioned was, a lot of these things are successful because maybe of time constraints, right? The human beings weren't able to go through the process of validating these applications. One, perhaps because there's just the volume's too high. Two might be just because there's time frame issues. But you mentioned to me that they're as thorough as finding residential properties that are within sort of a geographic location that makes the applications make a lot of sense if people even did review them. So, I mean, they're putting a lot of effort into ensuring that they appear to be as real as they can, right? With real addresses, real credit cards, real information for the purposes of then ultimately withdrawing, capturing those funds and causing a lot of damage to the institutions.
Oh yeah, and Jason, that's what's been funny is the lengths that some of these scammers will go to. When you think about it, potentially it's bots, because you think about the ability to create a bot and get it to get smarter and smarter over time. But we had an instance where a record was scraped from an online record to grab the person's demographic data. And then to grab the address information, it was pulled from a Redfin. It was so funny. It was pulled from a Redfin listing online. Sure. And we knew it because on the Redfin listing, it didn't name the name of the high school. It just put the school district. And on the actual application, this person actually put the school district, not the name of the high school, in the high school field. So it was easy for us to say this data was pulled from Redfin. But when we went in to start looking a little deeper, and a little deeper, and a little deeper, we're like, wait a minute. This property is owned by someone who has a last name of Hallock. The person on the application's last name was Hablock. And I'm like, what's the chances that someone with their naked eye would have caught this?
Right.
Thinking about it. What's the chances? And I spoke slowly there because as I said that I wanted it to be picked up. Like, what are the chances when you're looking at that someone's going to pick it up with the naked eye? That's going to be looked over. Oh, that's maybe a typo, and keep moving. Where we're like, no. Something else is up here. this needs to be pulled out for review at a later point, and let's review it again and again. And that's really what you have to do, because the scammers are getting smarter and smarter and smarter. We're having to bring in every type of data you could imagine, not just data that was traditionally used for ID verification.
So when I worked in higher ed personally, I worked in identity management before I left for private sector. And there was a great deal of tolerance for, name and field mismatch, typos and things of that nature. So what you're ultimately getting at is the mechanism of fraud here leverages the bias towards being accommodating that is so prevalent in higher ed, and the time delta between submission and recognition of something that's untoward. I mean, how do you shorten the time frame then? What are these strategies that are the most successful for identifying fraud of this nature and getting it out of the system before it's possible to transfer funds or something to that effect?
That can be difficult, especially in a higher education model like we're in now. A lot of the community colleges deploy, instant enrollment. You apply within a matter of moments. You're getting an email. You're getting some kind of automated correspondence to get you moved through. These are places where the scammers are just living, because if they can hit you with as many as possible, they don't care if only 1 or 2 or 3 gets through. That's all they need, and they've gotten it in. And so the attacks have been, in that manner, so to say, more so versus some of them have been not so much of a grand attack as it is. I call it penetration testing. Is a lot of what we're seeing as well, where they try it in one method, they get shut down. They try it in the next method, and they keep tweaking those applications until they get through. And not to mention that there are right now live Python scripts that you can download online that have YouTube tutorials that tell you how to do the process of getting these bots to apply to spoofing. And I know I got off the subject a little bit. If you had to throw your question back out there again, but I kind of was on that. It was in my mind.
I mean, I'm interested in the segue, candidly, because naturally, as security-focused people, when you say pen testing, I immediately think, there are identities that are being issued. Certainly, it's possible to impersonate and send emails and a phishing campaign and things of that nature, but issuing of an identity and having access to courses and potentially systems like VPNs, I mean, there are many, many other things that an attacker could achieve by merely passing the gate in a convincing manner.
I mean, I think that's the overlap here between what we do on a regular basis, and then the transition into more sort of defined fraudulent activity, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can see ransomware being a very easy next step for something of this variety.
Right. You guys are thinking like I just got chills, because you guys are thinking like I'm thinking. Like literally, that's exactly where. I'm not joking. I got all choked up there. That's where I want to. That's where I want this to go. I, as a very young developer, read the book The Gift of Fire. Everybody doesn't read that book. It's about coding and the ethics about it and around it. It's something that I kind of require for my team and I. We work in data security. I love that book. But everyone doesn't operate like that. And now we are out and trying to, stop the people who are trying to get in from different ways. When I look at it as kind of like this. The cybersecurity team is like your armed security at your home. They're looking for the robbers. They're looking for the bad actors who look like they may be a little suspicious. What our platform is doing is finding those people that you may trust to come inside the home who may not be trustworthy anymore once they get inside the home, type of thing. And so what we're doing, I think, can really work in tandem, because if I can do penetration testing, and I learned penetration testing very early, penetration testing is much easier from the inside than it is from the outside. So the first step, if I'm trying to get into an institution to do something malicious, get a .edu. So I'll send 1,200. I'll create a bot, send 1,200 applications. I don't care. Only one of them needs to get through. Now I've got that one.edu. I start emailing this teacher and start getting, specific type of information. I get a conversation going with them, tell them I'm going to be in their class. I'm a dog person. What kind of dog do they have? What kind of dogs do they like?
Everybody loves dogs.
I'm just, just pilfering this information for, like, I've done this, guys. I've literally done this to show how easy it can be to get into this information. And you didn't speak on different things. Oh, you like NASCAR? Yeah. Who'd you see? Logano did pretty good the other day. Harvard didn't do so well. And now this, my favorite driver is. And so now you have these different things to try to penetrate even more. And now you keep writing them and you text them, you send them a text message later. Hey, I'm going to be doing this and this. I'm in a bind. Can you help me out? All the teachers had a conversation with you for a while. They said, okay, yeah, I'll shoot you a cash app. And from there, you have enough information to go off and be as malicious as you want with that person. And now being able to let that be your segue into the institution, attacking other folks and getting it to be seemingly accepted because you have that .edu. We're talking way past just the effect on the IT and financial aid. We're talking about, that .edu is precious to institutions. You ever had ICANN write and say, hey, we're going to start blocking all emails from your domain because it's being known for phishing? That could kill an institution to have something like that happen. But those are the type of things that institutions are subjected to when there is no level of protection, or when you can let someone in through this manner, but you have the most outstanding cybersecurity in the world. How much is that cybersecurity going to block known students, quote unquote, in its processing of being secure?
Right. So something of what you just mentioned makes me think of the duration, the dwell time of these attacks. You've talked about them being somewhat front-loaded to registration and then dropping the course really toward the beginning before they have barriers against dropping courses and things like that. But what about the longer term cons? I mean, are there any that persist over the duration of a semester that builds trust because, hey, they took a course, therefore they're a real constituent and enabling, fleecing of a different manner? Maybe, worth the money and effort expended up front to gain something else?
Yeah, there are. There was actually, we were speaking, I spoke at CDOG out the Southeastern Data Users Group. It's a Lucian Users Group now in Myrtle Beach last year. And at the end of my speech, one of the constituents there, he was like, hey, I'm not proud to speak on this, but what we've had in recent times is folks who are buying houses and buying cars calling us and saying, why are you in my credit report? Why does it say I owe you money and I have a loan to your institution? And the guy's like, well, that's because you attended here for 2 years. You actually have a degree sitting here that you owe us for. But it looks like this is not your degree, so you owe us for it, but you cannot use it. Nice to meet you, though. That's kind of how that's been. Wow. And it happened multiple times. And so, when these scammers say, okay, what is the 4 or 5 grand a year from Pell Grant when this is an institution that may cost 25, 30 grand? I can now impersonate them as a loan, get that money back for the loan, and let them be on the hook for it in the long run. And that's essentially, some of the other infrastructure that these scammers are working in.
So let's transition a little bit because I think we're bumping up against time, and it's really one thing I definitely want to cover, which is, everybody's talking about AI. I think it's become a much more mainstream vernacular since ChatGPT. If I recall our conversation, you're utilizing AI in your tool to do this, right? It's not, you don't have a team of people who are looking at these applications on behalf of an institution. You're doing this programmatically, and I'd like you to spend a minute on that.
Yeah. We're doing this programmatically. So we've been in the world of integrations. Our flagship product was an integration tool, AMSA Connect, that came out a few years ago. And with that platform, what we started providing was data verifications for addresses, phones, and emails for all records moving through for all students. And so essentially that ability graduated to us learning how, the fraud actors were working, being able to teach our system some of those patterns and being able to train it with purely, like, I'm not joking, nothing but higher education data. And I think that's one of the things that is important because the data in higher education looks completely different than the data in the private sector. And so working and training the model in that manner has been beneficial for us. But again, I don't think you could actively and readily find fraud at the speed that the scammers are moving without some sort of AI or some sort of bot that can get as smart as they are, because they're utilizing bots that 15 minutes, 25 lines of code can attack 35 schools that are getting smarter by the minute. And so we want to be able to utilize that same infrastructure. Our team has partnered and is utilizing the fraud detection infrastructure within machine learning for AWS to be able to pull that off on our side. And so that's what we're leaning on as far as our machine learning infrastructure. But again, keeping that in-house with the higher education data that we've been working with.
I mean, certainly you have to go toe-to-toe with the tools that the threat actors are using. Otherwise, frankly, there's no hope of success. So it makes a great deal of sense to me.
Yeah. And there's so many data points you really have to consider. I mean, you're talking real estate records. You're talking census data. I mean, just to kind of give you an idea of the type of things you're talking, looking at a census and seeing if there is someone who lives in that home that is within the age range or was in the age range at the last census that would be going to college and is this age. And if not, then let's start looking at some other deeper endpoints to see how good can we get in identifying this fraud. And that's some of the things that we really wake up and do every day. Like, you guys are keeping your ears to all the different issues in cybersecurity, the new bugs, the new different attacks that are happening. I'm the same side on trying to get an understanding of how the new actors are operating, because they are utilizing AI as well, Jason. We've seen not just the applications being generated utilizing AI, but also some of the additional data on those applications being utilized as AI generated data as well.
You mentioned synthetic identities. How synthetic? I mean, I've heard of fraud being conducted with, contrived images and headshots and things of that variety. Is it going to that extent, or is that not part of your analysis?
It's an interesting. I hadn't even thought of that, Steve. Like, using some of these tools now to generate the digital version of somebody.
Yeah, ultimately, we're talking about abuses of trust.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I mean, social media in particular is rife with this sort of issue. I can imagine it's, if not already occurring, at least on the horizon.
And that is one of the reasons why it is so important that, the data sources work together. I am ecstatic about just having a conversation with you guys, because I can see where this can go in further when it talks about fraud on a greater level. But when I think of a synthetic identity, that's kind of like an identity that was created of, real pieces of data that was put together so that it could pass certain filters. So a real person's name, maybe an address that looks very close to their address on the same street, or it'll have an off number. Like on my street, you can't have even numbers, but let's say it's an even number on that street. Things like that. They'll have a very closely related phone number, but the phone number will potentially be off. And in recent time, I mean, this is so funny you mentioned this. We were in our tech meeting a couple of weeks ago reviewing the AI model that could create images of people, because we're like we're talking, our team, our back-end team is just like, wait a minute. So we need to now, because we have an ID verification process, which allows you to verify a person's ID and things as part of SAFE. It was like, we need to get that pushed in front of every client, because this can now become a major problem. Not only can I create a fake identity of myself, I can create a completely, a complete image of what I want to be able to look like and to present it to you. I can make myself look as harmless or as harmful as possible to try to get through whatever filters that you have. And so when I think of synthetic identities, it's these identities that, and again, knowing that and this is what synthetic identities can really help beat, knowing that we check other known data points. Let's say they've used this synthetic identity, this fake information, to get an account at Best Buy, to get a gas card, to get an account somewhere else. So now there's verifiable accounts that most data verifications are going to look at and say, oh yeah, this is good. We see it here, we see it there, we see it there, and allow it to be verified. Where our system looks at those data points, and if you identify a potential synthetic identity, then you go in and look a little deeper. And those are becoming more and more prevalent. It was a wave of deceased, a wave of stolen. Now it's synthetic as they're mixing and matching all the data together.
Well, given the prevalence of spouses, family members, siblings, and things like that that are likely to attend after an initial entry into a school, that is a difficult problem to solve. So I can appreciate the problem domain.
Yeah, the web is wide.
Indeed. It is really nice though to hear just how similar our perspectives are as it relates to. Yeah, I mean, frankly, what you're doing is, how do you best protect your clients, and frankly, how do we all protect institutions that are as important as higher ed? And they have a culture of permissibility or permissiveness, and I think they need partners like you who can really sort of stand alongside them, helping them to identify areas of risk and areas of potential fraud in the future. So, I mean, I think what you're doing is great. I'm going to be really interested to see it evolve because I think you're on the forefront of a looming huge problem.
Oh yeah. And I mean, we're facing it head on. I'll tell you, it is a looming problem, and it is something that we're just excited to be part of. This is a passion for us. Everything our company does is a passion project. I'm a passionate guy about higher ed, and so when this problem came up, it was almost like, I played defense most of my life, but I can also be a pretty good blocker if I needed to be. So someone just hit our quarterback pretty hard. Okay, I got to go down and play offensive line for a little bit to make sure that next time he comes through here, he's going to get hit a little harder. It's going to be a little bit tougher for him to get through this line, because the quarterback, that's our financial aid, our registrar of admissions. That's what I call up the hill as an athlete. Those folks need to be protected by all causes. They lead the team through the championship runs. And so for us to do that, and we know that admissions and enrollment leads the thriving ability of a lot of institutions to keep them moving for retention and so forth and so on. So it's my job to come down and get on that offensive line and make sure that they're protected. It may not be the position that I was meant to play, but it's the role that I'll be willing to die on that hill of stopping this fraud, scamming activity, from coming into higher education. I look at it as a group of helpless, a helpless arena where, as a whole, I think, higher education is a great target. There are certain schools that you can go after that they're going to pop your hand and say back up. But there are a lot of schools that are open and are getting just inundated in this fraudulent activity.
Well, I think that was a motivational ending. I love the story, and I love the description of sort of the why behind your thinking. So I hope that we have I'm sure we will have a chance to talk in the future. I've enjoyed the conversation we had at EDUCAUSE. I certainly enjoyed this one. Wish you the best, and look forward to talking again in the not too distant future here.
Most definitely. We're going to be on the forefront of cybersecurity and fraud prevention together, Jason. I appreciate it.
Maurice, it was a pleasure. Thanks for joining.
Thanks very much.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn
or
on Twitter at Vancord Security.
We
and
remember,
remember,
at 30. I had
stay
a feeling
vigilant,
we might go over
stay
our
resilient.
20-ish minute area.
Been
But I think the
Cyber
content
Sound.
was great, and I really appreciate the willingness to spend the time with us.
That was awesome. Wow. I'm sweating because now I want to have another conversation.